Good afternoon. Anybody received any notifications lately? That's a joke, right? You know, another joke related to that. See, this notification says, "Be alert." And we used to say that. Be alert. The world needs more alerts. The world needs more alerts, so be one, right? Be alert. Well, you know, I think it's just kind of interesting. Oops. I'll get it later. It's just kind of interesting what notifications are about. And we've all, thank you. We've all been through a period of a lot of electronic notifications and other kinds of notifications and so forth because of all the drama here recently. It's almost not funny, right? But it's also good just to kind of sit back and think how helpful some of that was. You know, the first things that happened with the fires is someone told me, oh, you should get this app called, what is it? What? Watch Duty, right. I see some of the rest of you have done the same thing, right? I downloaded the Watch Duty app. You know, I didn't just download it, though. You know what I did? When I heard about it, I went and looked it up and read about it. Who is it? Who are these people? Why are they doing this? What's this about? Can I trust it? That was my question. Can I trust Watch Duty? And after reading and researching, some, I thought, well, this is probably pretty good. I guess I can trust it. These are experienced people who know something about fires and firefighting, and here they're trying to, disseminate helpful information about it. Well, then as I got it, I said, what do these little flags mean? What does this color mean? What does that hatch mark mean? And I had to spend some time figuring out the app and learning more about it just to understand what it was trying to tell me. And then someone warned me, well, you're going to get quite a few notifications. That was an understatement. But I kind of began to trust it, and I appreciated the info, and sometimes the info was, wow, really quite interesting. And I began to follow that a little more and look a little more at it and whatever. And then I had to say, is this telling me to do something? Because many times the app was sending out a notification and people had to do something as a result. There were other means of notifications going out, but boy, those notifications in the app were also relaying that. It was a pretty credible, interesting source, and it still is. And I'm thankful the phone doesn't bing as often with those distinctive notification bell from the Watch Duty app. I'm glad that number of notifications has decreased. But when I hear one, I'm still interested. I think it's all kind of very interesting how important that notification process was. And the process I had to go through mentally to use it, or to receive it, or to consume it. First, I had to decide if it was a credible source. Am I going to believe it? Then I had to decide, what does it mean? And I had to seek out more understanding in order to be able to read it. And then I had to kind of decide, how am I going to react? What am I going to do? Is there an action for me to take? And maybe there was no action for me to take. But maybe someone else was taking action, and boy, I could be praying about that. I could be concerned about that. I could be wondering about my friends who lived in that zone. I could, there were actions to take based on that. I think it's kind of interesting about notifications. And the reason I bring that up is the scripture we just read, when I look at it and think about what Jesus was doing here, he was issuing a notification. He took this scroll and read it and said, be alert. The world needs more alerts. It's interesting what he was doing here. Let's just take a look at that for a minute. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me. Now, he opened up the scroll. As you know, as Franklin read, it said that he had started preaching. This wasn't his very, very first sermon, according to the way this account is written. He'd been preaching around, and he had lots of acclaim, and people liked him and so forth. And then he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, where he had been a kid. And he went to the synagogue, and he had a chance to read from the scroll. And I was thinking, maybe this wasn't his first opportunity to read in that synagogue. Maybe as a young person, maybe he'd done this before or something. Interesting. But this time, when he read, he turned to the place where it said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me." Now, when you think about it, that is a bold thing for him to say. Wow, what is he doing here? He's saying, be alert. Why is the Spirit of the Lord on me? Because he has anointed me. He's saying he had a particular mission, that God sent him to do something. He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. That's pretty significant, and especially at that time, in that place, to that culture. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. Occupied by the Romans, they didn't really feel free. And recovery of sight for the blind. And maybe in all this touring around and so forth, he'd started doing miracles already. I don't know, but that was a big part of his ministry. Wow. He sent me to do those things, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now, what he was reading is a quote from Isaiah, mostly Isaiah 61, but there's a couple references other places that tie to that. But if you go back and think about Isaiah writing that prophecy, putting that word out there, boy, this is a deep section of Scripture. I'll try and explain what I mean by that. You see, embodied in here is a discussion about many issues. Many issues. And don't we in our lives deal with many issues too? Preach good news to the poor. Now, good news, poor people need good news. Sometimes poor people are happier than some of the richer ones. But to preach good news to the poor, there's actually lots of different kinds of poverty. Financial poverty, but there's an emotional poverty and a spiritual poverty. There's a poverty in friendships. There's a lack of all kinds of things. And to have good news preached to those who are poor in any of those ways is really what he's talking about. He wasn't saying, boy, I'm starting this ministry and I'm going to be helping all the poor people down the street. Well, that's somewhat true. But no. What he's starting to do is to help all kinds of poverty, in all kinds of people, on all kinds of streets. This is what God anointed him to do. This is what he's empowered to do. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. There's all kinds of imprisonment. Sometimes we're incarcerated in a jail. Sometimes we're imprisoned by our own feelings. Sometimes we feel imprisoned by others who have influence in our lives. Sometimes we're imprisoned by our own memories and bad experiences or bad habits. Imprisoned by bad habits, does that ever happen? I'm trying to make light of something that's pretty heavy. All right? Because don't we all suffer from that? He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. Which ones? Yes, all of them. That's what he's about. Recovery of sight for the blind. What do you mean blind? Yes, he opened the eyes of people who physically couldn't see. But his real mission was to open the eyes of everybody because we don't see. We don't see from God's perspective. We don't see what he sees. We don't see what we should. And he is the one who's bringing recovery for our sight. Now, sometimes we read this phrase and we say, oh yeah, he's talking about those Pharisees, those blind Pharisees. Glad I'm not one of them. Yeah, right. To release the oppressed. So much there. So much in that. The oppression we feel. Just the oppression we feel here in the last few weeks from these fires and the traumas that are involved and all the people we know who are affected. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. At work, we had some classes being held in a building which was safe and this and that and the other. But you know, the people who had to drive to Pasadena for the class just weren't comfortable being in Pasadena. You want me to drive toward where the fires are? They were feeling oppressed by that. And the instructor told me, said, okay, we're ending class early. Please go home. The feeling of oppression by the circumstances around. There's all kinds of oppression. Internal, intrapersonal, geopolitical in the biggest sense and the smallest sense. Everywhere. Problems, problems. Well, he says to release the oppressed and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now, we know, and they know, and Isaiah knew. This is a phrase, the year of the Lord's favor, that has to do with what? The Jubilee. The 50th year celebration. When God had set up an economic system for them, that, yeah, they live and all kinds of things go wrong and problems happen and, poverty and debt and so forth. And then on year 50, reset, forgive the debts, move home, get the old property back, release everything, and start afresh. And that maybe only happened once in your lifetime. But boy, that was a big year, right? You probably think of years in your life that you look forward to that. I always look forward to a certain birthday. Why? Because it was a big milestone birthday? No. It was in the year 2000. I thought, I'm going to be alive at the change of the millennium. Well, think about them. They're going to be alive maybe at the Jubilee year. Now, whether or not they ever really did it, some historical argument about that and so forth, but they were supposed to have done it. They were supposed to have hit reset. And he said to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, to proclaim the big reset. Wow. Wow, that's huge. And here he is sitting there saying, today this scripture is fulfilled in your ears. That's a big statement. That's a big statement for him to make. I think there's a lot of lessons in this quote from Isaiah, or this wording here. I get certain lessons. One, there's a lot of issues being addressed. That's pretty obvious. But another one, I look at this, I say, the poor is mentioned, the prisoners are mentioned, the blind is mentioned, the oppressed are mentioned, and there's all kinds of versions of that for all kinds of people. God isn't leaving anybody out, is he? He's including everybody in what he's doing. So one of my lessons out of reading this is God's not exclusive. He's not an exclusivist. That's a powerful lesson. This is for everybody. This is for me and the people I don't like. Oh, did I say that? Is that out loud? Yeah, God has a different point of view than I do. And he is able to bring release and freedom for all those folks, for everybody. Well, the other thing I get out of this is, in the context of how Isaiah was writing this, when the whole nation was suffering as a result of their own sins, you might say, to make a joke, that the nation back then was wearing management shoes. Management shoes are ones that have the bullseye painted on the toe. So when you shoot yourself in the foot, you don't miss. Because that's what they had done. They had really shot themselves in the foot. They got taken into slavery. They got imprisoned. They got drug away. Can you imagine how those ancient Jews felt when so much promise about their identity and everything was tied up and invested in that temple? That was a very special house to them. And those marauders came in, surrounded the city, gathered them up, took them away from that temple, and burned it down. We feel so much pain for the neighbors and people we know whose houses burned down. It was a whole nation whose house had been burned down. And they suffered. And they were traumatized. And Isaiah was proclaiming good news, proclaiming that there would be a change to that, proclaiming that God was going to come through anyway. Anyway. Proclaiming that God is committed, no matter how much they'd shot themselves in the foot. He was committed. He was following through. And what's he following through on? Well, sometimes, I have to step back. I read this and I go, what am I supposed to get out of this scripture this week? You're going to give a sermon on it, Fred. What are you getting out of it? So, well, now look here. Look at the big picture. Way back when, once upon a time, was another way of beginning a story. In the beginning, that's how the story begins here. Okay? And we see that God offered a partnership to the humans. He offered an agreement. We're going to work together. You're going to have dominion. And we're going to make this garden really super. And they had a choice. And they said, that's not the deal we want. They said no to that agreement. And a few chapters later, we find that God offered another agreement to a guy named Noah, or in Noah's time, but he did something different. He didn't ask Noah to agree to it. He just told Noah what he was going to do, or rather what he was not going to do again. He made a promise. He made a promise and said, I'm going to keep this promise. I am committed. This is God talking to fallen man. And a few chapters later, we meet this guy, Abram, ultimately Abraham, and God makes quite an arrangement of promise with him. All those stars you see there, you're going to have kids like that. You're going to have family like that. Wow. Wow. Now I realize that's a figure of speech. I don't have to take that literally. If I want to take that as a prophecy literally, then we got a lot of time yet to go. There's a lot of people, and there's been a lot of people, but not that many. Stars is a big number. But as a figure of speech, it impresses us what he committed to Abraham he was going to do. And Abraham believed God. God gave him a notification, and Abraham trusted it and believed it and acted on it. And he took Isaac when God gave him a notification to go set up for a sacrifice and take Isaac. What in the world? Why would you do that? I think he had checked out the source and believed it. He had sought out what its meaning might be, and he decided to partner and took action. He received God's notification, and he took corresponding action. And that was a huge promise. And then later, maybe a book later, or, quite a few pages later in here, but in that section, there's this other discussion and agreement that God makes with his people, with Moses as a mediator here. And he makes an agreement or a covenant, and they act it out in all the ways of acting out covenant, legal, binding relationships in those days. Today we have a third party who witnesses your signature, da 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 da. There they had some special sacrifices and cutting animals in half and walking in between it. And there was blood and there was a meal with the meat and so forth. And it was a way of symbolizing this commitment, this covenant. Well, here with Moses, he did that again. And it was a big deal. It was a big commitment. God made a big commitment that he would follow through on his promise and his covenant. And then the people went along, and as I said before, they ultimately shot themselves in the foot, ended up oppressed, in prison, not able to see what they needed, and very much hurting for good news. And Isaiah said that God's going to come through. God's going to follow through. God's going to hit reset. God's going to bring relief. And then there was a time later when God did another bunch of promises with a guy named David. Now here he's getting even more specific about this covenant promises. He's saying, not only am I going to follow through, but there's going to be someone from your line, from your descendancy, to sit on this throne forever. Well, he got more specific. And it didn't really have to do with what David did, because as we read to the end of the story, David kind of messed up at some point, as did everybody else in this whole process. And the more you read the story, the more you think, oh man, what a mess. You know, what mistakes they made. Well, I'm glad I'm not like them. Ha 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 ha. We discover, ooh, yeah. Ooh, we have desire. Ooh, we lie. Ooh, we deceive. Ooh, we want to try. Ooh, we want to ignore God. Ooh, we want to just kind of hedge our bets here, there, and there. It's pretty hard to throw stones. Boy, these people deserve a lot of stones. But it's pretty hard to throw stones, honestly. We're all in a mess. We're all in that mess. But guess what? God is committed. He made a deal. Whether or not we keep our part, he's going to keep his part. And this, in effect, in my way of looking at it, is what Jesus was saying when he read this scripture and said, today this is fulfilled in your ears. So be on notice. Notification alert. Okay? Today this is fulfilled. Why? I'm the one. I'm the one descended from David. I'm the one fulfilling these covenants. I'm the one promised. I am the fulfillment of the law. I am the law. I am the covenant. I am the one who's going to do this. Why? Well, he didn't say it in those words, but because he's God. So here we are, dealing with him, coming into this synagogue, opening this scroll, reading this message, and saying, today this scripture is fulfilled in your ears. All the people spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. He was absolutely mesmerizing at that moment. Now, there's a lot more to the story. And there's more how he lost their trust, or rather they refused to continue to give it because they had their own ideas, their own paradigms, and they didn't want to change. But he was faithful to what he'd promised initially, and that was his commitment. And God said, I'm committed. I am completely committed, no matter how much you turn away. What a notification that is. What an important alert to get. What a message. But just like every other notification, we have to stop and ask ourselves. Jesus said he is the solution. Is he a credible source? Do I want to download his app? I used to tease the kids at camp. I said, you know, you're all into social media. Have you read his blog? You know, he's been texting for years. Besides that, when you post, he's the first one to read it. And he follows you. The question is, do you follow him? So here he is giving this notification. This big, huge statement about I am the solution, and I am here, and I am going to bring this to pass. Do we believe it? Do we download his app? Do we understand his app? Do we understand what he's talking about? Have we gone and read the instructions? Have we gone through to try and figure out what all this is talking about? Do I need to spend more time seeking to understand what he's saying? That's kind of like that app. I have to figure it out. I have to put some effort into this. I can't just coast. I got to put some effort into it. And then if it's credible and it's important, and I think it is, what action do I need to take? Do I need to flee? Do I need to pack? Do I need to lighten the load? Do I need to focus? Do I need to study again? Do I need to start over again every morning? And maybe several other times during the day? You know? Again, he's making sending out an incredible alert. And we have the opportunity to believe it, to learn about it, and to act on it. So through the whole process here of what we read in the New Testament, Jesus ultimately establishes what is called, and he called, a new covenant. Well, there was all these other covenants. Isn't that good enough? No. He's got a new one here that even is bigger, better, improves on, more relevant, more current, and so forth than all of those. And this new covenant involves him. And he's the center of it. And he invites us to really enter into that covenant. But not only does he invite us, he empowers us. He empowers us to actually fulfill it, to fulfill our part of it. Not because we're going to fulfill it, but because he and the Spirit are going to fulfill it in us and through us and for each other and for everyone. And he's not exclusive. He's going to deal with every issue. And he is committed to it. And so Jesus tells us, if you have these handy, he tells us to take this, and this is our way of walking along between those cut animals. This is our way of signing on the dotted line. This is our way of acknowledging this agreement. He says, enter into this covenant with me, he says. This is the new covenant in my blood. He's giving himself completely. And he's asking us to buy in and to follow along. I think it's really neat how Jillian mentioned that the church is Jesus. We are Jesus. And as he said, he is anointed to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed. We are too. We are, as the church, as him, here to preach good news to the poor. Preach it by telling them, maybe preach it by showing them. And who are the poor? All of us too. You sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. Do we forgive? Do we receive forgiveness? Do we accept his forgiveness? That's real freedom. That's real freedom, forgiveness. We are to proclaim recovery of sight for the blind. That's epiphany. That's illumination. That's being able to see something we never saw before. That's admitting to seeing it. That's finding out, oh, I didn't ever know that was in there before. Wow, isn't God cool? To release the oppressed, including ourselves. We are his body. We are his church. And he asks us to allow him to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and total release and freedom. And he said, do this to remember this commitment. Remember me. Let's do it together. Let's take the bread and let's remember him and let's accept that covenant. Similarly, this agreement is signed not in ink, but in blood. His blood. Blood is life. God gave his life for all of us. To him be the glory. And so now as we commune together in him and ingest him, you know you are what you eat, right? So if we ingest him, all the more we are Jesus, right? What do we say? What do we learn? We maybe have opportunities for new insights. So whether it's today or tonight or yesterday or whenever, have you had any new epiphanies lately? Have you received any notifications from him? Are you online and listening to him? Because you know what? He's here to strengthen you. He's here to strengthen all of us. He's here to walk through all of the mess with us. That's how we endure. It's not by him coming, taking all the mess away. It's by realizing that he's right there next to us, walking with us through it. That's where our strength comes from. He strengthens. My conclusion, I need to be alert. Why? Because the world needs more alerts.